Imagine standing on a battlefield, where the earth trembles beneath the weight of cannon fire, and the air is thick with smoke, sweat, and desperation. Now close your eyes and ask yourself, if you were there, would you be a hero, or just another name lost to time? The American Civil War was not only a clash of armies but a crucible of human endurance, courage, and sacrifice. But here's the twist: many of its greatest heroes remain unknown to most of us. What does it take to risk everything for a cause, knowing your story might never be told? Before we dive into their lives, let's address the elephant in the room. How often do you think about the Civil War? If your answer is not often, you're not alone. For many, it feels like ancient history. But here's the truth: the shadows of that war stretch into every corner of modern America, shaping our politics, our identity, and even our everyday freedoms. Let's talk about the people who stood in those shadows. Take, for instance, Elizabeth Van Leeuw. Ever heard of her? Probably not, yet she orchestrated one of the most daring spy networks of the war. A wealthy Southern woman, she pretended to be insane, literally earned the nickname Crazy Bet, to avoid suspicion while smuggling Union intelligence. Imagine risking your life daily, surrounded by enemies, all while feigning madness. Now ask yourself, could you pull that off? Or consider Robert Smalls, a 23-year-old enslaved man who did the unthinkable. Under the cover of darkness, he commandeered a Confederate ship, navigating it through heavily fortified waters to freedom. He didn't just stop there. Smalls went on to become a Union hero, a congressman, and a voice for equality in the post-war South. Picture this: a man born into chains steering himself and his family into the annals of history. It's almost cinematic, isn't it? And here's a question that might catch you off guard: what would you do if the fate of your country rested on your shoulders? These unsung heroes didn't have the luxury of asking themselves that. They acted, boldly, recklessly, and often without a safety net. The stakes weren't just life and death, they were about defining what kind of nation America would become. But wait, before we move on, let's lighten the mood. Picture Elizabeth Van Leeuw in modern times. Can you imagine her using TikTok to spread secret codes? Probably would have gone viral. And Robert Smalls? He'd be that guy turning every ship meme into a motivational story. Humor aside, their actions remind us that bravery doesn't always come with a cape or a spotlight. Yet, their stories also pose an uncomfortable question. If you lived in their era, would you have been brave enough to stand up for what's right, or would fear have kept you silent? That's not just a historical question, it's one that still echoes today. Speaking of echoes, we've barely scratched the surface. There's one more story that might just rewrite everything you thought you knew about Civil War heroes. Stay tuned. Let's take a moment to reflect. What drives someone to risk everything, their life, their family, their future, for an ideal? It's one thing to read about heroism in textbooks, but it's entirely different to imagine yourself in their shoes, making those impossible choices. This brings us to Clara Barton. Most of us know her as the founder of the American Red Cross, but during the Civil War, she was a one-woman force of nature. Clara didn't just treat wounded soldiers, she went directly to the front lines, places no woman was expected, or allowed, to be. She dodged bullets, braved disease, and comforted the dying, all without a second thought for her own safety. Imagine the grit it takes to keep going when the person you're trying to save dies in your arms. How does one summon that kind of strength? But her work wasn't just about survival. Clara ensured that soldiers weren't forgotten in death. She personally led efforts to identify thousands of missing men, offering closure to countless grieving families. Think about that for a second. In a time when communication was painfully slow and records were often non-existent, she made sure the fallen weren't reduced to numbers. It's humbling, isn't it? And here's where it gets even more remarkable. Clara Barton didn't ask for recognition, medals, or fanfare. She simply acted because it was the right thing to do. Now, before we delve into the next story, let's ask ourselves something. How often do we, in the hustle and bustle of modern life, forget the power of selflessness? When was the last time you made a sacrifice for someone without expecting anything in return? It's a sobering thought, isn't it? And speaking of selflessness, let's talk about the soldiers who never even saw the battlefield but played critical roles. The contrabands, as they were called, formerly enslaved men and women who sought refuge with Union forces, weren't just passive observers. They dug trenches, built fortifications, and provided crucial intelligence. These acts of quiet resistance and support weren't glamorous, but they were indispensable. One such man, William Gould, fled slavery by rowing a small boat 29 miles up the Cape Fear River to reach Union forces. Once free, he joined the U.S. Navy, not just fighting for his life but for the promise of a better future. His diary, preserved to this day, offers a glimpse into the thoughts of someone who chose action over fear. And here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Gould's descendants still hold that diary as a family treasure, a reminder of his bravery. How many of us have something so tangible linking us to acts of courage? Imagine flipping through pages written in ink over 150 years ago, knowing those words were penned by someone who defied all odds to change the course of their life. We've seen so much already: spies, healers, soldiers, and everyday individuals who became extraordinary. But there's one more tale, a story so harrowing and inspiring that it ties everything together. If you